France and what happened there and what it means. France is the second or third largest economy in Europe, a very important part of the world economy, but very particularly important in Europe. So what happens there politically and economically is relevant really to the whole capitalist system, but certainly to Europe. France has a presidential system, and in their system, all the different parties put up a candidate for president if they wish. There were, I believe, 11 of them at the first tour, it's called, the first time. All 11 run, and the two candidates with the most votes, top two vote getters, then have a runoff a few weeks, 2-3 weeks later. And that runoff was last Sunday. Okay? So in the first round, there were 5 parties that did pretty well. And the other 6 got very small votes, so I'm going to concentrate on the 5. One of them was the traditional center-right party, the conservative, the party of Sarkozy and the recent leaders that are sort of like they're a conventional Republican and Democrat. This man's name was François Fillon, F-I-L-L-O-N. And he was scheduled to do real well and perhaps be the next president of France for 2 reasons. One, his logical opponent, the head of a socialist party. France has a socialist party, which, as I'm going to tell you in a couple of minutes, is kind of like our Democratic Party, but it's called socialist because in France there's a long history of the Socialist Party. And the Socialist Party had the presidency, a man named François Hollande. Okay? Mr. Hollande came in, won the presidency a bunch of years ago by promising, and this is crucial now, promising the French working class, if you vote me in as president, I will get rid of austerity, will stop all this stuff of laying public workers off and cutting wages and helping the big banks so it trickles down to everybody else. I won't do that. I'm a socialist, after all, he said. And so I'm going to help the economy revive by building from below, helping the people at the bottom and building the economy back up. That way, vote for me, and the French voted for him overwhelmingly. The Socialist Party not only won the presidency, they became the majority party in the French Senate and the majority party in the French National Assembly. They controlled everything, sort of the way the Republicans and Trump now do here. As soon as he was elected, Mr. Hollande caved in on everything, reversed himself, basically became another austerity administrator, making the French people hate his guts and all the parts of him too. He had popularity levels that would rival those of Mr. Bush in his worst moments, Mr. Trump, where he's rushing to now. We'll get to that shortly too. Like 9% of the people thought he was doing a good job, and the other people wished him a speedy death. The French people were so angry at him that he didn't even run for re-election, which would normally have been his behavior. He quit. He didn't run. So Mr. Fillon, the Republican to Mr. Hollande's Democrat, the kind of mainline establishment, slightly to the right, but very namby-pamby in the middle. Mr. Fillon was thought to be a shoo-in. Nobody could challenge him. The socialists were out of favor. The further left people, no one took seriously. There was this crazy lady on the right, a woman named Marine Le Pen, who has a party that believes, I kid you not, that she's going to make France great again. It's an attractive slogan. It must be because people like her and him like it. And she hates immigrants. Oh boy, is she against immigrants. She wants to do things to immigrants I can't even tell you about. It's beyond building a wall. So she hates immigrants, and she's going to make France great again. Exactly how she's going to deal with this, nobody knows, and she doesn't say. But they didn't take her seriously either. Mr. Fillon was to be the elected official. Then Mr. Fillon made a mistake. Or to be more accurate, he got caught. He had been a preacher of austerity, that the way France was going to come back and be an important economy was by tightening its belt. Everybody has to sacrifice. Everybody has to do with a little less income. Everybody has to do with a bit fewer in government services. Everybody has to do with a little bit less. And then the poor slob got caught having created no-show jobs for his wife and both his children to the tune of €1 million. That's more than $1 million a year that he, as a government official, was shoveling to his family while preaching austerity to everybody else. This hurt his popularity badly. So he went from Mr. Number One to who? And he came in third, which meant he was out of the running. What about the Socialist Party? Completely collapsed. The Socialist Party is so detested in France that it went from the number one party to this time, nothing. They had fielded a candidate, Mr. Hamon, and he came in with a roaring 6% of the vote. Even Mr. Fillon, the screaming crook, had 20%. But not the socialist, who was honest. Or at least he hadn't been caught. And then there was a surprise, a real surprise. From the far left of the Socialist Party, a former communist in France, French Communist Party is an important organization, a man named Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and you're going to hear his name again in the years ahead, comes in and he basically puts forward a Bernie Sanders kind of, he's going to tax the rich, and he's going to really do this, and he is going to be something really different, and he roars in and gets 20% of the vote. That's a real surprise. Okay, so the two top winners, a guy who worked with Mr. Hollande, the hated socialist. His minister of economics was a man named Emmanuel Macron, which is close to the French word macaroon. And in France, he is widely known as Mr. Cookie. To give him the respect that he deserves. He is a cream-filled... This is dangerous where I'm going here, so we'll leave. So Mr. Macron is the new president because he defeated Marine Le Pen. They came in first and second. Le Pen got about 1/3 of the votes. Mr. Macron got 2/3 of the votes, so he's the president. He's never held political office before. He has no political party because he was in the Socialist Party, but when the popularity of the Socialist Party went down, he left. He was a man of courage, you got to understand, a man with principles. Of the kind of, this way, with these sort of principles. He knows what his principles are because of the way his finger feels when the wind hits it. While he was the Minister of Economics for Mr. Hollande, Mr. Macron was famous for one thing. He wanted to bring flexibility to the labor market. That's another one of those phrases, go look for that rock. Flexibility means making it easier for employers to fire you. The French working class, like much of the European working class, worked 100 years throughout the 20th century to get a whole raft of protections. You can't fire someone in France the way you can in this country. You have to have reasons. The fired worker can go to court. You have to come forward with a whole network of reasons, and if your reasons are no good, they will reinstate you, and you will be paid a penalty as well as your back pay. And there have to be very good reasons. There's protections for workers. I know that's hard here in America to get that idea across, but in other parts of the world they have that. You know, running water, toilets, and protections for workers. They had that in France. He wants to get rid of that. He wants to make flexibility. He wants to lay off all these extra government workers. It's more austerity, folks. Now let's do some numbers. I added up all the people that are eligible to vote in France. I counted them. And I asked myself, what percentage of the eligible voters did Mr. Macaroon get? The answer is 43%. half the people who voted for him left the polls and explained to the journalists, I wasn't voting for Mr. Cookie, I was voting against Marine Le Pen because she's a fascist. That's what they said. So if you ask, what percentage of the French voters were actually interested in Mr. Cookie? And the answer is very few. They don't know him real well, he's never run for anything before, and he's associated with those socialists who betrayed everything they stood for. These are not good recommendations. Mr. Macaroon, therefore, has a real big fat problem. Nobody likes him, and he's just starting out. Nobody wants the policies he's already committed to. Half the French working class, enraged by the decline in their standard of living, are now voting for Marine Le Pen. They've decided the bad thing that's happened to them is those damn immigrants that have been let into the country, so they're going to fix France by kicking them out. And they're going to make France great again by celebrating French culture. More foie gras. 3 times a day. They're going to develop a new breakfast cereal. Poor geese, poor ducks. I don't know if you know how that's done, but you don't want to know if you don't know, so I won't tell you. It's a disaster what's happening in France. The other part of the working class, however, gives us some hope, because the other part of the working class didn't go for the socialists. They were betrayed by the socialists. They went for further left. They went for Mr. Mélenchon. He got about 20% of the vote. That's not much less than Ms. Le Pen got. And in fact, if you put Mr. Mélenchon's vote together with the little bit that are left in the Socialist Party, that together becomes 27% of the vote, and that's more than Mrs. Le Pen got. The newspapers here are full of the struggle against the right wing, by pretending that there is no left wing, but there is one, and it voted, and it's in the millions in France that it voted. What's happening in France is a split of the country, and that's why I'm talking about it, because it's not so different from here. One side goes to the right, that's Mr. Trump, and one side goes to the left, that's Mr. Sanders. Yes, it's not exactly the same, but you can see how different people looking at a system that isn't working for them, that makes the future look even grimmer than the present, and they're saying, I'm not voting for the traditional Bush and Clinton. They don't look good. They're like Fillon, even if they haven't been caught yet doing the same thing. And this leads to a final point about this. Socialism. Few words on socialism because it is changing, and it's changing very fast. And we need to understand that because it's going to be impacting here too. Socialism begins as the other, the alternative to capitalism. Socialism is the name slowly developed in the 19th century and into the 20th for people who looked at capitalism, the system we have, and said, pew, we can do better than that. They thought that the way to do that was to take private enterprises and make them government enterprises so that they would work for all of us, like the government should make it work. That they wouldn't be enterprises making profits for the few who owned them. They would be enterprises doing well for everybody because the government owned and operated them for everyone, sort of like the government operates the Central Park or the beach or the other things that are done for us as a community. That was the old idea. And to make it work even better, they weren't going to let the old socialists, they weren't going to let the market decide who gets what. If there were scarce ice cream cones, they weren't enough to go around to all the children, they wouldn't in the end be sold to that kid who could offer the most money for the ice cream cone. You oughtn't to give the ice cream cone to the person with the most money, especially since you never asked how they got that money. That there are better ways to distribute ice cream cones than giving it to the one with the most money. How about giving it to the one who hasn't had an ice cream cone for 6 weeks, rather than the one who had 6 yesterday? Well, there's other standards for how you distribute. And the old socialist idea was, well, we should distribute according to people's needs and not according to how much money they collected. So we shouldn't distribute by the market, we should distribute by government planning that distributed according to the need. So the old socialist idea was the government would take over production, family farms and factories and stores and all of that, and that the government would plan the distribution. Capitalism was private enterprise and markets, and socialism was public enterprise and government planning. Okay? That led to what? It led to two kinds of things. Number one, it led to revolutions against capitalism, successful ones in Russia, in China, in Cuba, in Vietnam, in lots of places. And so they set up those socialists, what they thought they were supposed to do. The government took over the enterprises, and they planned the distribution rather than private enterprise and markets. And they achieved some things, but they paid a heavy price. The heavy price was a concentration of power in the hands of the government that proved to be unworkable, undesirable. It was an experiment in socialism that taught people, okay, if that's what socialism is, we got a problem with where it goes. It did really good things too. Let's be real careful. The Soviet Union grew from the poorest country of Europe to the superpower number 2 after the United States across the 20th century. No mean achievement that no other country ever did, with one exception. There's one other country that has grown as fast as the Soviet Union over an equal period of time, and that country is the People's Republic of China, which does suggest something that if you want to go from being poor to rich, the way history suggests you ought to do it is to do what the Russians and the Chinese did. Let's all pretend I didn't say what I just said. That's how you be a good American. You pretend you didn't hear what I just said and you don't know nothing about it. That's the reality. So it achieved something, but it paid a very heavy price. And the price is so heavy that the Soviet Union couldn't even survive its own failures. Despite its achievements, it couldn't survive the concentration of power. And the Chinese are very similar in what's happening there. Cubans are a little bit different because they've recognized the problem and they've decided that the future of Cuba isn't government enterprise and planning. It's a transformation of the enterprise. The issue, it turns out, for the Cubans isn't whether you're private or public. The question is, are you a top-down, undemocratic, dictatorial enterprise, or are you a worker co-op? And the Cubans are deciding to go in the direction of co-ops and have become one of the few countries in the world that's made a real commitment to it, which we will see how that works out. The other thing that happened to socialism in countries like France and Western Europe was that they stopped being about an alternative system of any kind. What they became were people who said capitalism's fine, it's just a little rough around the edges when the conservatives run it. Give us the vote and we'll make it a nice, softer capitalism. You know, it'll stick it to you at the workplace, but it'll give you free schools. It'll stick it to you at the workplace, but you'll have national health insurance. We will create a safety net. We will take care of people while we work you to death, which is better than being in a country which works you to death and doesn't take care of you along the way either. And socialists became people who believed in capitalism with a human face. That's what happened in France. The trouble is, capitalism, for reasons I'm going to end today with, capitalism is not letting that play out. Capitalism in the countries of Western Europe and North America and Japan can't afford socialism anymore. That's why the socialist parties are disappearing. It can't provide a human face. It can't provide free schools. It can't provide free health care. It can't do it. And it isn't going to do it. Well, let's be careful. I don't want to be misunderstood. Do we have the resources to do it? Of course we do. But the way this society works, those who have the wealth are determined, almost like lemmings rushing off the end of the pier to their own doom, to accumulate more and more. That's why even the richest ones, like Warren Buffett, are saying, stop with this craziness. Don't cut corporate taxes. The government needs to do a bunch of things. It's almost as though the richest of the rich are looking around and screaming at their fellow rich people, don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. We are rich because this capitalism provides a certain basic something for the mass of people, and if we don't do that, that mass of people will eat us up. We better give up part of what we have, or else we'll lose it all. Very old problem. But they're deaf. They don't hear. They don't hear the left. They don't hear Mr. Warren Buffett, their own man. They can't. They're on a drive that has no limit. We don't want an estate tax. We don't want a corporate tax. We don't want you to take care of uninsured men. It's craziness. But it's the craziness of people who can't see beyond what they've been trained to do all their make money. Make more money. Use your money to make more money. And let the chips fall where they may. And the chips are falling, and they're being lit by sparks, and we're in deep, deep, I'll use another technical term, doo-doo. Why? And there's a closing for today. Why are we in deep doo-doo? And here I want to give credit, I don't do this as often as I should, to a brilliant writer. His name is Stephen Roach, R-O-A-C-H. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. Former chairman of Morgan Stanley Bank of Asia, the firm's chief economist, currently a senior fellow at Yale University's Jackson Institute of Global Affairs, as well as senior lecturer at Yale's School of Management. I can tell you it's stunning that I recommend him because I have a long history with Yale University, and people like him are very rare at Yale University. Most of what goes on there has the gravitas, the depth of insight of a very, very, very thin pizza. So in any case, he's the exception. He's the exception, and I want to recognize him. He works on something called Project Syndicate. If you ever want to look at it, it's all available on the internet, www.project-syndicate. Does wonderful analytical work. And so his recent work is called A World Turned Inside Out. And this explains why socialism is having the history it has and why we are in the dilemma that we're in. Basically, he says, over the last 20 years, everything has changed. A world turned inside out. And he drives the point home as follows. Over the last 20 years, the developed capitalist world, Western Europe, North America, Japan, has been growing at roughly 2.5% a year, the production of goods and services. Whereas China, India, and the developing world has been growing 2 to 3 times faster. So that 20 years ago, 60% of the world's production was in the old centers of capitalism, only 40% in the new centers, and now, 2018, it's reversed. 60% is produced in China, India, and Brazil, and the rest of the world, and 40%. The center of capitalism is gone from the places it was born in. That's particularly important for you, because you happen, unfortunately, to live in the wrong place at the wrong time. You live in the place from which capitalism is leaving. That's why there are empty factories everywhere. That's why half the stores on many of the avenues of New York City have been empty, sitting there for months, if not years. That's why Detroit is a hulking wreck of a city where it once was the center of American capitalism. That's why Marine Le Pen gets her biggest vote in the industrial cities of northern France, which have no jobs anymore because they've all moved to China and India and Brazil and everywhere else. To be blunt, but to be clear, it's over. Capitalism has moved on. It's the same system. but it can make more money someplace else. It can make more money in the very places it ripped off in order to make this the center of the world. Asia, Africa, Latin America, ripped off so that the people have nothing, are used to low standards of living, would be grateful for any job, no matter what you pay them, way less than you have to pay an American. So the corporations are making their decisions, to use a technical term. Screw the Americans, or the French, or the Germans, or the Italians, or the Japanese. We're going to China. We're going to Vietnam, we're going to Indonesia, we're going to Brazil, we're going where the labor is cheap. And that's where the wages are growing. Let me give you just one statistic. Over the last 15 years, wages have been stagnant in the United States. They've gone up 6 times in China. Let me do that again. You understand? Imagine if I were looking at you and I told you that your wages had gone up 6 times in the last 15 years. You'd jump up out of your chairs and run off to the mall to spend some of it, because you haven't been able to. But the Chinese have been. They've got more smartphones per person than Americans do. Why? Because they can afford it. That's where capitalism is exploding. We are where capitalism, and there's no nice way to say this, is dying. And with it go all the creature comforts. What was once affordable, nobody wants to afford it. The rich are making out like bandits because they're the ones who are paying the low wages over there. They're making the big profits. That's why all the expensive restaurants in the Hudson Yards will be full as soon as they open, because the money for that is there. But for the mass of people to have that American dream, the car, the home, the college education, that's over. That was already over in 1970, but you got a 25-year reprieve by being able to buy everything on credit. But you've run out of the ability. You can't borrow anymore because you haven't got the wages to ever pay it back, and everybody knows. Just like Leonard Cohen's song, everybody knows. Listen to that song again, because it's in there. It's in there. That's why the Socialist Party had to betray. It can't. There is no way to salvage what has happened to capitalism without changing the system. If we stay with this system, it will take us down with it. And that's going to be the issue of the years ahead. Who has the courage to say it? Who has the courage to draw the implications? And what in the world does it mean? It can't mean having the government take over and having the government plan. We've been there, we've done that, and we see where that goes. Some of it worked well, and we'll hold on to that part of it. But turning everything over to the government, not going to happen. And the socialists who keep talking like that find that their audiences are deaf, won't respond, will not go there. So you have to, if you're going to be a leftist, you have to come up with something else to make it once again reasonable for people to say, yeah, we want socialism because we don't want capitalism anymore. It's not working for most of us. It's scaring us as to where it's pointing. Us, and for our children even worse. So there has to be some other way to go. The right wing will come in and say, yes, 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 you're being screwed left and right, but it's all the fault of those immigrants. And if that isn't enough, those black people. And if that isn't enough, the Jews. You know, it's the same candidates. It's boring. It's old. But there's reasons. What is the left going to do? It can't play that game. So the left has to come up with an alternative. And the alternative that's emerging now is pretty clear, which is why we call what we do democracy at work. You're going to have to get rid of the capitalist system where it lives, in the stores, the factories, and the offices. You're going to have to stop making it a profit-driven system for a tiny group of people to make the money and have that be the bottom line. The people have to sooner or later say, no, 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 the bottom line is the quality of life we have as a people. the opportunities to develop ourselves, our education, our skills, our communities. That's what the bottom line is, not the private profit of a handful of our people who are shareholders or wealthy people, the ones who can buy the politicians so they don't even have to pay the estate tax. Come on. How many times are we going to be kicked in the face before we understand? It's done. Every system, I know you've heard me say this before, every system, slavery, feudalism, ancient tribal structure, every system the world has seen was born, evolved and changed over time, and then it died. That's why we don't have massive slave plantations anymore. That's why we don't have feudal manners anymore. Capitalism is just another system. Instead of master-slave or lord and serf, we've got employer and employee. They're not going to last forever. They've had 300 years. It's enough. And they're not doing real well for us. I can understand our brothers and sisters in China and India who want their shot at the wealth we once had. Maybe they'll stay with it. But for the West, for Japan, Western Europe, North America, you know what our future is? It's Detroit and Camden and Cleveland and Lille, and I could go on and on. The people of Detroit watched that city turn into disaster over 40 years, from 1970 to 2010. The president couldn't do anything, the governor couldn't do anything, the mayors couldn't, they all watched it dissolve. So don't tell me that Americans are not capable of standing there watching themselves dissolve as a society. And it is not going to be pretty. In a country that celebrates the cowboy, that wants to be able to have a gun in every pocket in every store and church and school, how this plays itself out ought to scare the pants off of you. It scares the hell out of me. When systems reach this kind of point, where the mass of people cannot stand them, where the only people who benefit from them are a small minority, you are creating an explosive situation. I don't know what the spark will be. No one does. Just like no one knew in the summer of 2011 that if a bunch of people set up pup tents in Zuccotti Park, it would become a global movement called Occupy. If they had asked you, those folks, what do you think about me putting up some tents in a park? You would have thought they were a little nutty. And you would have said, go ahead and do it, and then you would have gone on and had another drink. But we would have been wrong, those of us who thought that. Because there was something going on, boom. And Bernie Sanders is something else going on, boom. There's more booms coming. They may not be as calm as those were. We may look back on those as quiet dress rehearsals for much bigger stuff. I don't mean to leave you with a sense of gloom and doom. So if it's too much, just remember, I'm only once a month. Television is forever.